Welcome to the Gunning Truth with Roni, and today I discuss the Arsenal's greatest ever manager, Arsene Wenger. Well, that's also debatable for our older folk, but an absolutely fantastic career that Arsene Wenger had, and unfortunately it soured at the end. As with all things, good things come to an end. He gave us a fantastic first 10 years, and it was extremely painful those last 3 to 5 years. Despite that fact, he still won the FA Cup a couple of times. So this is just me remembering Arsene Wenger. I think it was a phenomenal manager. I was very, very young. I was mostly into rugby as a youngster, so the full focus was on rugby. But something just happened when Arsenal started showing interest in... well, first of all, I went to a primary school that had just Liverpool and Man United fans in the southern suburbs of Cape Town. And I wanted to be different. And I chose Arsenal because of Highbury. I used to stay in Highbury Road in Kuilsriver in the Western Cape. So that was something that brought me to Arsenal. And then, of course, when it was announced, Arsene who? And it just seemed like everything worked. Like with so many people of my age at that time when Arsene Wenger joined Arsenal, it just seemed like everything, you just put everything together. And then you start to find out about the history of Arsenal, the 70s, the 80s, Herbert Chapman back in the day, and obviously George Graham's fantastic Arsenal that had the "it's all up for grabs now" moment at Anfield. So all of those things brought me to Arsenal, but mostly it was Arsene Wenger, and the beginning of his tenure was absolutely phenomenal. The type of players that he brought in, my favorite players of all time. Thierry Henry is obviously always at the front. Mark Overmars, I mentioned him second ahead of Bergkamp because he was my first favorite ever wide forward player, so winger. Mark Overmars of the Netherlands, and then obviously Dennis Bergkamp was actually before them. I loved the way that Patrick Vieira played. Loved Tony Adams, Martin Keown, Steve Bold from back in the day. We had Nigel Winterburn at left back, right back Lee Dixon, and then it later became Lauren, and then obviously that guy with a cell phone, Ashley Cole, Cashley as I like to call him, but he's obviously born and bred an Arsenal boy, and it obviously, like so many players after him, soured the situation with these players with Arsenal. But he still was in that invincible team, which you can still announce to this day. Lehman in goal, Lauren at right back, left back Ashley Cole. You had Sol Campbell and Kolo Toure at centre back. And in midfield, Gilberto Silva, one of the greatest holding midfielders. If a midfielder's team is successful and you don't quite understand what is going on and how it works with him in the team, then he's doing something right. Obviously, captain, fantastic Patrick Vieira. Loads of red cards. Sol Campbell also had loads of red cards. Arsenal in general had loads of red cards. But Sol Campbell in the hot. So it's obviously Lehman. You had Sol Campbell and then Patrick Vieira. And then up front you had Bergkamp and Henry, with Ljungberg and Pires contributing goals consistently from out wide. You had our current... deal maker, if you can call him that, Edu, that was in midfield, a very underrated player, and you had various other players as well. Sylvian Wiltord, another player that always showed up for the big moment. So these are the type of teams that Arsene Wenger built. Before that, it was obviously, I'm just trying to think, that was Robert Pires a little bit later on, but you obviously had Ray Parler there, you had Keown, Bold, Tony Adams, obviously Nigel Winterburn in the early years, Lee Dixon, David Seaman in goal, and then in midfield you had Petit and Vieira, obviously Anelka up front. I'm just trying to remember all these players now. It's players that I grew up watching, and then obviously Mark Overmars, as I mentioned before as well. So a lot of players that Arsene Wenger built over the years, and that is just absolutely fantastic. So obviously my earliest memories is of course the Blackburn game where Arsenal won 2-0. His first game, it was October that season, after the Bruce Rioch issues that there was with Arsenal. And then obviously as the season went on, Arsenal did really well. I'm not going to go according to stats and things that I've written down. I'm just going according to my memory back then. Like I said, it was all rugby at first for me, and obviously Arsenal has basically almost overtaken everything when it comes to my sporting journeys in life. But and then obviously the next season, Arsenal winning that famed double. A fantastic season Arsenal had. Obviously the Mark Overmars goal at Old Trafford was absolutely huge. The big moments at the last game of the season where Tony Adams ended up scoring the winner and Arsenal winning the league, and then obviously the Nicholas Anelka, Mark Overmars goals in the FA Cup final against Newcastle United for Arsenal to get one of two doubles in the Arsene Wenger era. And then obviously the Invincibles. What a football team. There's so many things. I've watched the DVDs over and over. Back in those days, you only had certain channels that the football came on. So if you only had the Mnet, which had CSN, then you had to wait on a Saturday for football games at times, if I can remember correctly. So DStv only came in later. So DStv is obviously our service provider, like Sky Sports and Fox and these. Well, I think Fox is actually free to air in America. ESPN, let's call it ESPN, BT Sport, those type of things. And then obviously you could watch all the football games. We've got that privilege now in South Africa where every single game is live. And if there's obviously a clash of games, then the other games comes on a little bit later on. So we're very lucky to all the games. And actually we are so spoiled that we actually get irritated with our service provider if a pre-season game doesn't get shown. So as of talking now, Arsenal won't have any pre-season games shown. Obviously, the Community Shield is a combination of pre-season's end and the start of the new season. So you don't really call that the pre-season game, even though people like to say when they lose, the Community Shield don't matter, and when they win, it's a big deal. But that's another story. And then obviously the news that Arsenal were going to move into a new stadium not too far from Highbury, and the magnificent Emirates Stadium, which was a huge thing. I can remember at the time I obviously loved Highbury, and I actually didn't want that move to happen. Obviously, if you think about it, you had to move to a bigger stadium, more modern stadium, so that you can get with the times. But there were so many things promised from the Arsenal hierarchy, a couple of people that I really dislike all these years later. And we were promised that we were going to compete with big, massive teams, and that's happening now today, 2023. We're talking now about 2006 or 2005 into 2006. So Ivan Gazidis, actually a South African-born person. So funny enough, he's got, I don't know if he was born in South Africa, but he's definitely got South African heritage. So funny enough, there's a guy that I got to dislike, and a man that probably fell out with Wenger at the end. If you read the books and you hear what Wenger said, even though Wenger was very coy when it came to all the bad things that happened at the end. But just think about the types of players that we've had over the years at the Emirates era. Obviously Arsenal with that amazing end to the Highbury era. It was the year that we actually made the Champions League final. And we obviously ended off against Wigan at Highbury, where Thierry Henry scored a hat-trick at the end. Yeah, those were actually amazing memories. I'm just trying to think now what else happened. We had the Lasagna Gate at the end of that season, where Martin Jol was in charge of Tottenham, and Tottenham ended up messing up the top four, and Arsenal once again scraping into the top four and into Champions League football. And then you had the Dennis Bergkamp testimonial to open up the Emirates Stadium, and the first game for Arsenal was a draw where I think it was Gilberto. Theo Walcott came on, and he created a goal where Gilberto scored, and it was so many draws that season I can remember where we somehow made the top four with a team that had loads of injuries. We had Fabregas, Henry was sulking quite a bit. So there was a lot of things that actually was quite bad, even though we made the Champions League somehow for quite a number of seasons. And obviously with the input of money, you've got oligarchs coming into football. It just seemed like Arsenal were being left behind. And when you read Arsene Wenger's books, and I read a couple of books from agents where Arsenal were obviously had to penny pinch because of certain things that had to, obviously we had to pay back huge loans to the banks after moving into the Emirates, and obviously Arsenal had to penny pinch. There were times where earn their monies to agents, and which is something that Arsene Wenger didn't want to do, and it's something that Arsenal actually later on became to regret, paying all these large fees to agents. And it was a couple of years into Arteta's years, or the end of Emery's little tenure, where agent fees and agents themselves became a little bit too much at the Arsenal, and that changed, and once again we're now in a better footing in 2023. So so many things, if you think back, leads to all the stories when it comes to the Arsenal and Arsene Wenger. But Arsene Wenger, obviously, I grew up a massive Arsenal fan through Arsene Wenger. The club is still bigger than the manager, but I'm just saying that the entire Arsene Wenger era was basically in and around this time when I started supporting Arsenal. I obviously was an Arsenal fan, but I didn't watch every game before the Wenger era. But obviously during the Wenger era, it was watching every single game when you could, and when it was available on our television in South Africa at the time. And then obviously some of the very sour things. So obviously social media came into play at the end, and obviously fan channels, and a lot of, it's very difficult for me to say that it was driven by these fan channels, and we know the big ones where there was various characters on there slating Arsene Wenger's name, and then others that was very pro Arsene Wenger and infighting at the football club, and it just became untenable, his position. And it's a combination of he was let go and kind of forced out of the door. Henceforth, he didn't want to come back to the Emirates because there is bad feeling towards pockets of the fan base, as well as how it ended. And obviously Arteta is doing his best to try and get him back, and he's getting his statue, or the statue is already out, and obviously Arsene Wenger will be at the Monaco game tonight. So yeah, terrible to mention this, but obviously the likes of the 8-2 at Old Trafford, loads of reasons as to why, self-made, and then also the injuries as well. You look back at the 1000th game against Mourinho, where Arsenal got thumped. I don't even know if it was 6-0 or 6-1. I think it was 6-0. And lots of thumpings by Man City, but anyone can get thumped by Man City. And embarrassing games and embarrassing seasons. The season where, okay, I won't say embarrassing, but the young Arsenal squad. So we've finally got an awesome squad together, and then it all went pear-shaped for two ways at Birmingham City St Andrews, where not for the first time clubs thinking Arsenal are soft ended up breaking a player's leg. So Diaby first, then it was second, it was Eduardo, and third Ramsey. So players' legs being broken, Arsenal getting thumped by football clubs, not paying agents' fees. That's so a million here, a million there, in order to get certain players. When you did get the players, they weren't able to perform over a long period of time. And then also the two that I can remember very difficult end of season runs, the Fabregas season where he was so fantastic, and I think it was the Birmingham City game at St Andrews where Eduardo broke his leg and Arsenal just basically collapsed from there. You can say collapsed like last season. The Birmingham City final at Wembley in the Carling Cup, another capitulation from Arsenal defenders and players in general. And then the other one was the season where we only bought Peter Cech, and that was shocking because it was the year that Leicester City ended up winning the league, and Arsenal just couldn't do it. Remember sitting at home, the Manchester United game, Rashford's debut, and Rashford has ended up. So we actually gave him the ability to continue being a thorn in our side. When we gave him his debut, it was the season of the Leicester City. We actually got the double over Leicester City, and somehow at Old Trafford we ended up messing that one up as well. And then we ended up coming second after Tottenham was actually pushing Leicester City for a while. But Chelsea sorted out Tottenham, and Tottenham ended up messing up the top 2 position, and Arsenal finished second that season somehow. So lots of memories. So many that I can't even remember now. But obviously the FA Cups was brilliant. I'm specifically referring to the 4 with Wenger. It could be 3. I think it's 3, not 4. That I remember now in the barren years. Obviously, that fantastic game at Wembley against Hull City, where Hull City went 2-0 up, and I felt like I was watching at the Arsenal Cape Town Supporters Club. I wanted to leave. And then, we just ended up hanging around, and it ended up being quite a great end to it. Obviously, it was Cazorla with a free kick, and then Koscielny with a goal where he got injured, basically, and then Ramsey scoring at the death. And then, I can't remember, it was the next season, I think it might have been, where we had Aston Villa in the final, Aston Villa shocking Liverpool in the semi-final. I can't remember who we beat in the semi-final. And then, obviously, in the final, a comfortable win, 4-0 over Aston Villa. And then, obviously, the third one was where we beat Man City in the semi-final, and then Conte's Chelsea in the final. Once again, Ramsey scoring the winner. I think Alexis Sanchez was basically, it was in that period where he did so well. So a lot of memories, and mostly good. Obviously, Arsene Wenger brought a whole new way of thinking after coming from Japan to England. Arsene who they called him. But this is just a salute to Arsene Wenger, obviously my favorite manager of all time. And I always have a smile when I see him speaking, doing public speaking, because he's an extremely intelligent man. And I really enjoyed I know there was mostly biographies, and then his autobiography was a little bit disappointing, but that's only because we wanted to know a little bit more, and he's just not that man. He doesn't want to basically give off everything. So I salute you, Arsene Wenger, and I hope that we get to see quite a bit of things in tonight's. Once again, the game isn't on South African television, so we need to find means to watch it. So that means you're very likely not going to see the behind the scenes stuff, but hopefully Arsenal have that fantastic behind the scenes videos that they all access videos that I'm sure they will do, and loads of people invited, the likes of Henri Vieira. I'm sure they will all be there, if I'm not mistaken. So I salute you, Arsene Wenger, and thank you for everything that you did for the Arsenal Football Club. Come on, you Gunners.